So again, Ryan Waguespack, Vice President with NATA. Delighted today to have a great panel to discuss this very interesting topic. Michael Maratto from NetJets and David Norton. And Simon, thank you for joining us last minute, but this would be great. So I guess the question is I want this to be interactive. I think this is a very interesting topic. And how did we get here? June of 18, NATA started the Illegal Charter Task Force. It started from us going out, engaging the aircraft management companies and saying, what's your number one issue, right? And of course, it was workforce and then illegal charter. So we decided in June of 18 to create this Illegal Charter Task Force to start an education campaign, right? We all recognize that there's a lot of bad information out there, and there's a lot of challenges out there, and there's a lot of big culture shifts happening. So from your guys' perspective, how did we get here?
So from my perspective, it did proceed. NATA did a really good job of picking up on this issue and engaging with FAA, but that's because it had become a problem. I was talking to FAA Council 3-4 years ago, and we were talking about this issue. I know a bunch of the aviation lawyers in the room, and we're always focused on setting up leasing correctly, setting up ownership companies correctly, and so forth. And 5 years ago, this was becoming a problem. It was becoming known to some of the FAA Council that were active in this area, and part of the perception was that with a lot of the economics up and down that we've had in the last 5 or 10 years, there are a lot of people that are sitting on airplanes and very frustrated because they think they're very expensive assets and they're not getting anything out of them. So especially, I'm in Dallas, Texas. Somebody was making fun of me because I'm from Texas the other day because I guess we're provincial or something, but we got a lot of land out there in Texas where lots of airports, lots of airplanes that sit around and don't fly that much, and there's a lot of activity going on where a manager says to the owner, hey, gee, if the airplane's not using, let's put some dry leases into place and we can make some money off of that. And so the comment was when there's economic stress and people feel like it's an expensive asset that's not being used, all of a sudden you're looking for creative ways to do that. You tie that into the increased technologies. I thought the panel before this was awesome because it really queued us up for there's this changing mentality of the shared culture, the app culture, gosh, we just want access to an airplane. So if you put those all together, all of a sudden there's just a lot of activity, and it got to the point where the FAA and the charter market and the charter community had to pay attention to it and really urge the FAA to start focusing on the issue more. So that's my initial take on it.
Well, I agree with everything you said. I think what's important to notice that the illegal charter market is a very difficult one to size. We don't know exactly how large the market is, and that's in large part due to the difficulty of detecting the illegal charter arrangement. These arrangements and the inquiry is often one that would be very fact-specific, and it would be based on what's in the dry lease agreement, what's in the pilot services agreement to determine, are we dealing with a dry lease, are we dealing with a wet lease? But certainly the anecdotal evidence and all of the information available to us through the industry and elsewhere suggests that this is a problem that's increasing in nature, and it's not just a problem that's limited to smaller aircraft. So this is an issue both here in the United States and internationally as well.
Yeah, it's been interesting. So when we brought this problem to the FAA a number of years, last year, they really didn't think there was an issue. And in fairness, there was the illegal charter hotline. Who out here was aware of the illegal charter hotline? Right. Who actually used it? Right? That's the problem. So for 10 years, they only had 120 reports. Last week alone, via our online portal through our website, we had 46. So now there's been a big education campaign going on within the FAA to start getting out to FSDOs. That's what me and David are doing now consistently around the country, going and meeting with FSDOs around the country with SEIT, which is out of Fort Worth, Special Emphasis Investigation Team. They're kind of the SEAL Team 6 of the FAA investigation world, and they go out and they know what's going on in the trenches. So they're educating the FSDOs on what's going on. Part of the issue was operators, entities were going to their FSDOs and saying, we got a problem. X, Y, and Z over here is doing something, illegal. It wasn't in their wheelhouse. It hasn't been in their wheelhouse. Now they've recognized that this is a significant problem. Again, we're kind of, as me and Dave, we've spoken earlier, we're kind of a victim of our own safety, right, or successes. We're a safe industry as a whole. And so the flying public believes, like, hey, beautiful airplane, Pilot with a white shirt, epaulets on, check, 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 qualified. And that's kind of alarming, the trend we're going in right now. So there's a big education campaign going on right now. You spoke on the international aspect. The international coalition has kind of been formed already. You know, I was in Mexico City a number of weeks ago, the Philippines, speaking on illegal operations. Everyone is concerned about this. Europe, everyone. Simon, can you comment on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a problem, obviously, this is the United States, it is a European issue, an international issue. I don't want to sound complacent, I'm certainly not. My personal professional view of this is one of the zero tolerance policy. But I don't think realistically we're likely to stop it. But I think what we need to do is adopt a portfolio approach to manage and contain and address the issue where we possibly can. As a safety regulator, as I say, I've got a very intolerant, zero tolerance policy towards this. The challenge I face, though, is quite often, and we will investigate any allegation that we hear, and we've been working with Waguespack recently on this high-profile cases in the UK, in other areas that I'm sure you guys have seen in the news. And the challenge we have often is that there's just anecdotal evidence, it's very light on detail. So if I get a phone call, and I've had probably 3, maybe 4 in the last 2 to 3 years, we will immediately go to an investigation. I have to reach a threshold, though, if I'm going to proceed with prosecution. Now, my role as a safety regulator, of course, is to ensure that the appropriate high standards of safety are maintained, and we all have a vested interest in that. But unless I'm able to reach that threshold whereby the lawyers say they've got a reasonable chance of prosecution, then my actions are limited to what I would call moving from enforcement to administrative action. Now, whilst that might not seem particularly effective, actually a stiff letter to the owner to inquire or to make it very clear their own investigation can have quite a significant effect. There's more on that, but I'll enjoy that.
Sure. So what impact will this have on our industry? What's the ripple effect?
I think from what I'm seeing, I'll share with you, I see 2 levels of impact right now. There's a very practical, what's going on right now impact, and then there's a more philosophical, what's coming down the road impact. The practical impact, and to pick up on what you said and peel that back another layer, there is a FSDO manager, let's say hypothetically the South Carolina FSDO manager, who has taken this on as a crusade. He was having an enormous amount of problem with improper dry leasing structures in South Carolina, and he has been at the pointy edge of the spear of getting the FAA to stand up and pay attention to this, and he's having some big impact. And from a practical standpoint, he is now actually out bringing other FSDOs on board, and I'm starting to get calls from FSDOs all over the country on some of the leasing structures we set up, where they're actually for the first time responding to truth in leasing notices. They're really actually starting to pay attention to this stuff. And they're educating for the first time safety inspectors on things to look for. Now, part of the issue is, and part of what Ryan and I have been doing is to make sure that they don't go overboard. The problem is if you ask for the FAA, you're poking the hornet's nest a little bit. If you want them to enforce, sometimes be careful what you ask for. The easiest people for them to enforce against are existing certificate holders, because that's who they can find. And they can come and look at what they're doing. And it's a lot harder to find the Part 91 quote manager who's not under anybody's microscope to see what they're doing. So a little bit of that's going on. The other thing that's going on is educational effort within the FAA that not all leasing is bad. If you set up a lease appropriately and it's done for the right purpose, that's totally copacetic. And there's a little bit of overkill going on as far as perhaps coming down incorrectly on leasing. So that being said, in talking to some FSDO folks, multiple FSDO folks, FAA counsel, they're starting to stack up a lot of subpoenas. There's apparently a lot of investigation going on, and they say, I don't know when this will hit, but that we're going to see a lot more activity. And if you've been watching this, there's already been a lot of activity, a lot of proposed penalties in the last couple of years. So that's the practical level. There is more discussion, more change. I could not believe a couple months ago we were at one of these meetings, and FAA counsel was actually briefing safety inspectors on flight department companies and illegal structures and leasing in ways that I've never heard them talk about before. So they're really paying attention to that. That's the practical level. The higher level, CJ, they put on this great Revolution Aero. I love that conference, 2 years now. That's right at the very core of, it's an awesome conference, it's right at the very core of all of the new technologies of urban air mobility and all that stuff. Well, that has a huge impact in this area as well, because it's gonna drive at some point a rewrite of Part 135. The previous panel that was talking about the millennials that want to share flights, that's pushing stuff. And to your point, we've created this really super safe aviation system. Everybody just assumes now that when you get on an airplane, it's safe. And what a lot of people don't understand is when you get on a four-person piston airplane with a 50-hour pilot, that's not the same thing as getting on the 777 I'm going to get on when I go back to Dallas on American Airlines. And there's a disconnect on what's going on there. And so that's the higher level policy side that needs to come, is how are we going to use the new technologies that's going to impact 135 to update the rules? Yes.
So much of the leagues that I've seen in the UK and Europe is to offend people, but there was what I would call a pilot called loyalty, and sometimes understanding exactly what that means is quite challenging for a layman like me, and unintentionally sometimes we find that people fall foul of the regulations, and it's inadvertent. So there's an onus on me to make sure that the rule set is as clear as possible.
And as we talk about technology and as we talk about innovation, I think there is quite a bit of room, as we've seen here over the last couple of days, for innovation within the scope of the current 135 regulations. We've seen operators, well, NetJets itself is an innovative operator with the product that it offers, and we've seen continued enhancements in service levels, safety programs. We've seen enhancements in product offerings from operators across the industry, and I think we'll continue to see that. And the fact that illegal charter is something that we're standing here and saying is something that should be stopped is not inconsistent with the idea that we can be innovative and we should be innovative to expand the market. And I think that's a really important distinction. Innovation is great, but we'd like to do so safely.
I think the only way that we'll succeed in properly managing or containing this issue is with a portfolio approach. I've spent a lot of my time working with the European Business Aviation Association, and part of that work was about education of the passenger. Because actually some passengers just simply don't know, they don't understand the implications of this, and then when you explain to them, well, if something goes wrong, and your insurance is going to be invalid and the rest of it, you then watch the colour drain out of their faces, and it really starts to get home. The trouble with prosecution, or the challenge that I face as a regulator of prosecutions, is that quite often I rely on those same self-passengers who just struck a great deal to a really cheap flight, and they don't really want to love the operator that's done that for them because they feel they're getting a great deal.
So how does industry address this? What's the best method?
I think it's education. It's meetings like this. It's panels like this. It's talking to your clients. Your comment about the color draining for the base. I've been part of the education is sitting down with your clients or your customers and making sure that they understand that risk allocation. I had a guy in my office once who said, "Oh, this is all fine. I've just been using this airplane. I've been leasing this airplane." Well, show me your lease. Well, it's a dry lease. He just knew that the guy had handed him the lease and he was told to sign it. I pointed out to him that where he was taking on all the civil liability and regulatory liability for the conduct of the flight, and he literally got pale in my office. So a big part of the effort is the educational effort. You got this whole thing with illegal charter and illegal operations. I think it basically boils down to the question of risk allocation. Does the reasonable passenger understand who's responsible for the conduct of the flight? The example I quite often use with my clients. Look, if I got here to come to this conference, I need to get to the hotel. I can either get in a taxi cab or I can get in a Hertz rent-a-car. This is not a perfect analogy, but it works. If I get in the taxi cab runs over a policeman's foot and hits another car, I'm going to get out of the taxi cab and go to another taxi cab. If I go across the street to Hertz rent-a-car and I get in the rental car and I do the same thing, I'm not going anywhere until that is resolved with Hertz and the policeman, right? That's dry lease, wet lease, or actually the other way around, wet lease, dry lease. And once the people start to understand that where all these rules came from, what it boils down to is risk allocation. Who's responsible for the flight? If you're responsible for the flight, you're not taking money from other people, you're flying yourself around, you're on the hook for it, then the general concept is there's enough angst hanging over your head, there's insufficient threat to the general public to make you go do all the charter stuff. But if you're a millennial and you just want to go someplace, and you want to pay for it, and you don't want to know the details, and you want somebody else to be responsible for it, that's a charter. I'm sorry, that's a charter. You got to comply with the charter rules. So a big part of that is making sure that people understand that so that they put themselves in the right bucket.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
And really education on a couple of sides. One of the things that we've often talked about is making sure that the entrants in the market are getting into the right product for them. So you've talked about some of the reasons that there may be increasing amounts of charter. If people were in the appropriate product in the first place, perhaps we wouldn't see some of the illegal charter activity on the back end. So knowledge as people are coming into the market, consumer education, combined with the enforcement that we've seen, a couple of high-profile cases that were mentioned, are all appropriate.
I love it. I love this first question. So, David, you're up.
Yeah, so that kind of, again, to peel the onion back another layer. So when there's actually two different issues buried within that question. Philosophically, if you are flying somebody, if you got a person sitting in the back and you are flying them around and you're getting any amount of economic benefit from that, as far as the rules as constructed and the philosophy behind it, so that's a charter. Now there's a rule that's kind of an FAA trap, and it talks about private pilots being able to do cost sharing, and that deals with what level of pilot certification you have that's not actually technically applicable to commercial versus non-commercial operations. So if you are a private pilot and you're going someplace and your buddy's going along and it's a common purpose, the FAA will generally allow you to do some cost sharing for that flight. But when we start talking about flying heavy iron, when you're in the bigger airplanes and you're moving people around and you're all splitting the costs, and you have to look at it from the reasonable expectation of the person who is paying the money. If they're sitting in the back and they had no clue as to how the pilots were picked, how the airplane was maintained, where the airplane came from, all they know is they're paying some money to go someplace. They have a right to expect, I think there's a philosophical argument, they got a right to expect a higher level of safety than a Part 91 where they have all that knowledge. That's that reasonable person concept.
This is the fundamental issue. When the consumer is purchasing a product which is a commercial product, the commercial regulation should apply.
Exactly, because from a British point of view, the fundamental central tenet of AOC operations is essentially a passenger. So if I buy a ticket, go from A to B, I should have a very high level of expectation in terms of safety and efficiency of that service. The bar is set at that level for obvious reasons.
All right, so we'll go back to Blackbird, but let's go with the second one.
Can I address that?
You absolutely.
So you all need to know, the FAA, whether you love them or hate them, they're an agency that's there for safety. They have a budget. They have a lot of tasking. They're perennially overtasked and under-budgeted. Some physios are a lot better than others. I get that. But they have a lot of stuff to do, and they have allocations on what they can pay attention to, and as a general rule, they can't pay attention to everything. Part of the reason why this has become such a big problem is the FAA can barely keep up with the 121 carriers, let alone the 135 carriers, let alone people that are flying around Part 91 that never talk to the FAA. I got a little airplane, I've had it for 20 years. I've talked to the FAA about my airplane exactly once. If you're flying around Part 91, they do not know you exist. They don't allocate funds to oversee you, and that's been a big part of the problem. Is a lot of people have done things wrong for 20 years and just thought because they never got caught, they never got away with it. To answer that question is part of what's going on with this one FSDO in South Carolina is he realized it was a problem, and he made the decision to reallocate some of his funds and tasking to take care of it, and he's spreading that word within the FAA. I would encourage you, especially if you're a 135 operator or you're aware of this, doing this correctly is good for everybody. It's good for my Part 91 clients who understand what they're doing. If they want to do 91 leasing, that's great, but if they want to do it safely. For my 135 clients, it's fair to them because they're the ones that went out and got a 135 certificate. You need to make some noise with the FSDO and get that they're the ones that have the choice, some choice, to reallocate sources to look at this issue. If you point out to them, hey, this is a problem here, this needs to be addressed. Now, there is a funny story about the illegal charter operator A who called the FAA FSDO about illegal charter operator B and wanted to turn him in, and the FSDO started asking A what was going on. He was like, no, you can't talk to me, I'm calling you about B. So you got to be a little careful how you do that, but put pressure on the FSDO to pay attention to this.
And on the resource point, every month there's a call now with every FSDO manager around the country. And so they're discussing what's happening, where they need resources. I know the Tennessee or Nashville FSDO sent resources out to California, to the Bay Area, to do some investigating. So they are sharing resources and they're talking on a monthly basis. All right, what's next? And I can answer a little bit on the 47 reports. Every single one of the reports has to be investigated by CIAT. They have to get into it and dig into it to a certain level. What we have requested from the administrators at the FAA to have some transparency, right? The biggest complaint is we submit these, we call through the report line and they go into a black hole. We don't hear anything from that point forward. And it's true, right? I mean, we submit them to the FAA, CIAT. I'm maintaining that relationship and I'm going out to see it next Thursday, to track all of these cases that we've submitted to say, hey, where are we with this? But once it gets to a certain point, everybody has to clam up. They can't tell me anything anymore, and they start working the investigation, and then it moves up through legal. But all of them have to be investigated.
Ryan, would it make sense to mention at this point that the FAA reauthorization bill in 2018 did call for a report on the reports that are coming out of the hotline over the last 10 years? What are the number of those reports? How are those reports being handled? And what are some recommendations to improve the handling of those reports going forward?
Absolutely. And our team met with Ali Barami and all the administrators, I think the 18th of November. They pulled the report out and said, here it is. We've got a lot of issues here. It'll be out in a couple of months. So they're having to dig in. In fairness, the resources, the challenges, and breakdowns in their system, this is, when you used to submit a lease to Oak City, where would it go?
Into a filing cabinet.
It was timestamped and went to a filing cabinet.
Now they're actually looking at them, yeah.
Now they're looking at it. So things are changing, but it is a massive ship, and it's taking a lot of time and a lot of energy to turn it.
Can I carry on to that same thought and also kind of sort of answer there's two good questions about, there's a platform out there, blurring leasing, there's so forth, and also back to the question of turning people in. So keep in mind, if you call the FAA and say, hey, there's a legal charter going on down the ramp, click, right. They got to go investigate that, but you've given them nothing to investigate this. And these tend to be, if you're a company, some holding company that has 15 leases out there and you're not doing it right, or you're barely doing it, just calling the FAA and saying this is going on doesn't give them very much to go on. So part of the trick here is you have to get enough information to the FAA so that they can actually go look at something. You can give them enough of a lead to look at. Conversely, in their defense, it takes time to build a case. You can look at something and you just intuitively know, boy, that really smells bad. But until they go out and they get documents, they get flight records, they talk to people, They can't really definitively say, because to your point, you don't want to improperly enforce if it's not appropriate.
So now you've just given me something to worry about, because I do worry about it personally, but, you know, I need facts to be able to then properly act, and then from those facts or that information that you give me, I will ask you further questions. So don't be surprised if I say, give you the details, and I'll come back to you and we'll have more discussion about the further details and get into it. And then from there, as we investigate, then we decide whether we're going to go down the enforcement or the administrative action route. But if someone just makes an allegation and says, I think there's something cookies going on there, I can't do anything with that.
That's right. Thank you.
I guess we're,
Yeah, we're out. So thank you. Thank you.